My name is Mara Ellison. I'm 41. For 16 years, my people thought I logged exhibits in a records annex behind a county building. Then, a Sunday in November, my mother put both hands on my arms in her kitchen and told me to own a crime my sister drove. A woman was in trauma with a broken pelvis. My sister had taken my truck. My father did the math the way he does a precinct. She has a primary. You have nothing writing. My sister didn't lift her eyes from the screen. She smiled and asked who would take my word. They had counsel at the island before anyone asked me a thing. They were so sure they had already printed my statement. What they didn't know about my work, about what that truck had logged, about the neighbor who was still up when my sister came back, pulled that house apart over the next 6 weeks. Where quiet folks finally say the parts their families spent years keeping off the record. If you've ever been the one they filed under harmless, stay with me, leave a comment, and subscribe. I drove 5.5 hours to Kellam Parish because a 12-year-old asked. My nephew Theo texted in October, "Grandpa's turning 70. Please come." He put a little star at the end, and that was enough. I hadn't been back in almost 4 years. The house looked the same, which is its own slap. Brick columns my father can't really carry and never stopped paying on. A banner over the porch that said Ellison for Parish Council in the same green as my sister's campaign shirts. Inside the front hall, there's a ceramic dish on the console, and every set of keys in the family goes in it the second you cross the threshold. My mother started that when I was 8. She called it courtesy. It's a count. I put my keys in like everybody else. In the den, there's a wall of frames, and I'm in 7 of them. The newest is a college photo from 16 years back. After that, the wall just keeps going without me. Nobody voted on it. That's what people miss. Nobody sat down and took me off. My father found me by the cider and introduced me to a school board member and a man who owns 2 feed stores. "This is our oldest," he said. "She does something with files downtown." The board member nodded. I shook his hand and said it was good to meet him, and I let it sit because I always let it sit. I'd gotten so good at letting it sit, it didn't feel like a choice anymore. Being forgettable was the one job this family ever let me keep. I'd gotten good at it. By 10, the party had thinned to the ones who don't leave. My sister Paige was still on, the way she's been on since she was 17. She has a face that finds the lens even when there isn't one. She'd had drinks, not a lot by her measure, which is its own line. Somebody remembered the yard signs were still in the shed past the pecan trees. My mother said morning was fine. Paige said it absolutely was not because a volunteer was coming at 6:30 and it would look sloppy. Sloppy, that's the word. I said goodnight and went up to the spare room, first door on the right. Twin bed, closet full of my mother's raincoats. You hear the hall from up there. You always do. I heard the keys shift in the dish, that dry ceramic scrape, and I heard the screen. I thought about nothing. I read a while. Around 10 to 12, I heard the garage go up and come down, then 2 voices in the kitchen, low, not a fight, arranging. I slept. When I came down for water after 1, the dish in the hall was empty. Not one set, 4 vehicles in the drive. I noticed it the way you notice a picture hanging wrong. Then I went back up and I didn't think about it again for 2 days. I should have. The local news at 6:30 came on while I was making coffee. A woman had been hit on Farm Road 12 near the grain co-op just before midnight and left there. She was 58, critical at St. Anne's. Witnesses had seen a dark pickup heading south and part of a plate. The anchor went on to a livestock report. I stood there with the carafe and felt the house change temperature. My father had been in his office with the door shut since 5:30, which never happens on a Sunday, and I could hear him on the phone using the voice he keeps for people who owe him. Paige didn't come down. My mother said she had a headache. I went out for my bag and found my mother already in the drive in a robe, wiping the inside lip of the garage frame with a tea towel at 6:45. She smiled and said the dust this fall was something else. My truck was at the end of the row and it was not where I'd left it. I'd backed in the way I always do. It was nose in. I walked around front. The left headlight had a split like a dropped plate, pale paint along the bumper, and the whole panel was clean, not car clean, rag clean. I had my hand on the hood and my mother came up behind me, and she didn't ask what I was looking at. She just said, "Come inside, Mara. Family, sit down." Cal Reardon was already at the island. He's been my father's lawyer since I was in braces. He taught me to bait a hook at Clear Fork when I was 10. He had a pad and a cup of my mother's coffee, and he'd been there long enough to finish it. That was the first tell. They didn't call a lawyer after they talked to me. They called a lawyer instead of talking to me. My father came in and sat, and did not say morning. They started talking. I want you to hear how they talked, because that's the whole thing. Nobody said, "Is she going to make it?" Nobody said her name. They said exposure. They said the next 72 hours. They said if this gets a story before we give it one. Cal said manageable twice. My mother poured. Underneath it, the facts stacked themselves. Paige had taken keys out of the dish at 11:20. Paige had taken my truck because it was last in and nothing boxed it. Paige had been drinking since mid-afternoon. Paige had come back near midnight with a cracked light and had not called anyone, and my mother had made her tea. Nobody called 911. Nobody drove back out to Farm Road 12. A woman had lain in the weeds beside her scooter for 22 minutes before a milk truck found her. Then Cal slid a sheet across the granite, turned so it faced me, already typed, already dated. A confession. Mine. I read it twice. It said I had borrowed the truck, that I didn't know the curve, that I had panicked. Somebody put panicked in my mouth before sunrise. My mother came around and took my shoulders and looked at me with more warmth than she'd shown in 4 years and said it plain, like she was doing me a favor. Just say you were behind the wheel. I asked if she understood what she was asking. She said she understood exactly, and that's why it had to be me. No spouse, no kids, no race, a job nobody could name. My father didn't stand. He looked over his glasses and laid it out like a line item. She has a primary. You have nothing writing. There it was. The family books in one sentence, said in front of a lawyer. Not one person flinched. Paige came in a hoodie, hair up, poured juice while I told them no. I said it once even, then again because the first one didn't land. Cal said we should breathe. My father said we didn't have time to breathe. My sister leaned on the counter with the glass and looked at me the way you look at a dog missing the trick. She wasn't even mad, which was worse. She said, "Who'd take your word anyway?" I picked up my jacket. I got to the doorway. Then my father said one more thing, and it stopped me with my hand on the wood. Paige already gave her statement, this morning at 6:40. Your name is in it. I turned. Cal wouldn't look at me, which is how I knew it was true, and how I knew he'd helped. She'd told a deputy her sister was in from out of state, that her sister had asked about the Farm Road cutoff, that her sister had gone out around 11:20. Not a charge. Better, a helpful detail from a cooperative house. I stood there and did the math they were sure I couldn't do. The truck is in my name. Witnesses saw a dark pickup and half a plate. I was asleep, alone in a spare room with nobody to say otherwise. First person to hand police a story owns the shape. Everyone after is just arguing with it. My father watched my face and thought he saw fear. It wasn't. It was recognition. I'd spent a decade next to people who got convicted of things they didn't do. Almost none of them lost on evidence. They lost because somebody got there first. I put the jacket back on the chair, not because they'd won, but leaving Kellum that morning would have been the most useful thing I could do for them. The out-of-state sister who came one night and ran. They knew a version of me that was 16 years stale, and they'd never checked whether it had been updated. That was their first mistake. It wasn't going to be the expensive one. I should tell you what happened when I was 26, because it's the foundation. I failed the bar the first time. A third of my class did. Footnote in most lives. It happened in August, and my father was 5 weeks from a runoff, and a man running for parish council needs a story that makes him human. So at a fish fry in front of 200 people who sell seed and buy gravel, he told them his oldest had gone off to law school and washed out. He shrugged. You can't win 'em all. The room laughed. He got the warmth. My mother stood next to him. Afterward, in the lot, I asked how she could let him say that. She fixed my collar. Gentle, which is what I remember. She said, we don't have truths in this family, honey. We have versions. I passed in March. I never told them. I left Callum and took a job 400 miles away, and I learned something in year 1 that I mistook for wisdom for the next 16. If you don't tell people anything, they can't take anything. So I stopped telling. I stopped correcting the file clerk joke. I stopped sending news. When I was sworn later, I buttoned the collar myself in a side room because I hadn't invited anyone who shared my last name. I told myself the silence was dignity. It took a woman bleeding in a ditch on Farm Road 12 to show me what it actually was.
By Monday afternoon, the state troopers had taken it from the parish because Helen Voss had gone from critical to still critical, and it was going to be a felony either way. A detective, Lena Cho, called the house and said she'd be setting interviews with everyone who'd been at the residence Saturday night. My father took that call in the hall with his hand over the phone. Then Cal came back at 4 with a cleaner draft. Panicked was gone. Became confused. He set it on the coffee table and said there was no rush. Then he said the parish attorney would want something by a week from Wednesday, which is a rush. That's how it works. Somebody tells you there's no pressure and hands you a clock in the same breath, and you're supposed to hear the first part. I went out on the porch and called a woman named Tasha Okonkwo I'd sat across from in a hearing 8 years earlier and never forgotten, and I told her everything in about 5 minutes. She asked 2 questions. Had I said anything to any investigator? I hadn't. Had I touched the truck? Only the hood. She said, good. Don't touch it again. Don't be alone with any of them. I'll be there Wednesday. I sat on that porch after we hung up and looked at my truck at the end of the drive with the cracked light. There was one thing in that cab none of them knew existed. It had been writing since somebody turned the key, and the problem for the next 5 weeks was I couldn't just go take it. People think a late model truck is a truck. It isn't. It's a witness that doesn't blink and doesn't care who signed the note. Mine is a 2024. It does 3 things nobody thinks about at the lot. It keys the driver profile to the fob, so the seat and mirrors jump to whoever's holding it. It pairs to a phone on its own, and it writes that down. And it has an event recorder that wakes when the sensors feel a hard enough hit and saves the 5 seconds on either side: speed, brake, throttle, steering. I sat in the passenger seat Tuesday morning with the door open and one boot on the gravel, and I turned the screen on and did not touch anything else. Driver profile, guest. Seat 3 inches forward of where I keep it. Under paired devices, one that hadn't been there Saturday morning. Paige's phone, connected 11:22 p.m., dropped 11:54. I looked at that a long time. Then I shut the screen, got out, closed the door, and did not take one thing out of that vehicle. I want to be clear why, because it's the most important call in this whole story. I'm a United States magistrate judge. I have thrown out evidence for less. If I pulled that data myself out of my own truck as the person they were about to hang, every hour of it becomes a question about my hands. At breakfast, Cal mentions the family would take care of the headlight. A shop in Dorset could take it Thursday. I said that was thoughtful. Then I went upstairs and called my insurer. I told them in the flattest customer service voice I own that my vehicle may have been in an incident while in another driver's possession, liability unclear, and I wanted a claim opened and the truck held as is pending investigation. 11 minutes. The adjuster put a hold on it before noon. No shop in 3 parishes will touch a truck with an open claim and a preservation hold because they don't get paid and they do get sued. Nobody had to be told no.
From Tuesday afternoon on, there was simply no way to fix that light, and no way to vacuum that cab, and no way to make that seat go back 3 inches. It was the dullest thing I did all month. My father found out Wednesday because the shop called Cal to cancel. He didn't say anything at supper. He passed the squash and asked about the drive up, and he looked at me about a second and a half longer than a man looks at his daughter. I've spent my career watching people recalculate at council table. You can see it. Something they'd filed under settled quietly slides into the open column. He was starting to wonder whether the daughter he'd written off in a parking lot 16 years ago was actually the person in his kitchen. He didn't ask. Asking would have meant believing there was something worth knowing. My mother refilled his glass and said the squash was from the stand, and everybody agreed it was good. Thursday, I drove to St. Anne's and sat in the surgical waiting room 2 hours in the corner, and I did not tell anyone who I was, because I wasn't anyone there and had no business being anything else. Helen Voss's husband was by the window. His name is Ray. He had a canvas tote with a crossword he never opened. A nurse came to update him, and Ray did what everyone does with medical people. He tried to make her a person instead of a pelvis. He said she ran the register at the Pinecone Cafe for 28 years, and she could ring a rush without looking at the keys. He said the van needed a clutch, $1,600, and Helen had decided in September she'd ride the scooter till Christmas and put the difference away, because that's what she does. She decides, and then she just does it. He said she's got a helmet. She wears the helmet. He said that twice, like the helmet was an argument he needed to keep winning. On the corkboard by the coffee, between a flu shot flyer and a church supper, somebody had pinned one of my sister's cards. Her face, that smile, the green, and under it in white caps the slogan her consultant had tested in May: Integrity for Kellam Parish. I looked at it a while. Then I put $4 in the machine and bought Ray a coffee he didn't ask for, and set it next to him and left before he could ask my name. Friday morning, I went to see Cal alone at his office over the hardware store on Main, because there was still a version of the world in my head where a decent man had gotten swept and needed one honest talk to find his feet. He has a photo on the wall of himself and my father and 2 other men holding a stringer of bass at Clear Fork in '99, and I am in the corner of that photo, 12, holding the net. He poured coffee in a mug that said World's Okayest Duck Hunter. I told him the whole thing, not as a suspect, not as a lawyer, the dish, the keys, the seat, the timeline. He listened the way he used to when I was a kid, explaining a knot, nodding, letting me finish. When I finished, he set his cup down and said, "Sign the statement, kid," kindly. He said the parish attorney was prepared to be reasonable, no priors, deferred, 18 months, and it's paper. He said it's the version that saves everybody. The man who taught me to bait a hook was quietly explaining why I should take a felony for my sister, and he thought he was being generous. On the desk between us was a yellow pad, and clipped to it a memo slip with a letterhead I knew because it had been on 100 filings in my first year. Office of the Kellam Parish Attorney, Boyd Henson, my father's first campaign driver, class of '93. Tasha had come up that Wednesday and taken a room at the inn by the highway. The afternoon I got back from Cal's, she made me say all of it out loud again while she took notes in a hand I couldn't read upside down, which I suspect is on purpose. Then she told me where I actually was, and it was worse than I let myself say. 1. The minute I pull anything out of that truck myself, I'm the accused handling my own evidence, and any decent lawyer turns the rest of the hearing into a conversation about my hands. 2. The ordinary door for all of this, the parish attorney's office, is a man who's been at my father's elbow before I could vote, and a file can sit in an office like that a long time without anyone technically doing anything wrong. 3, and she was careful, I hold a federal judicial commission, which means I don't get to be clever. Not one call to anyone I know, nothing to any reporter ever, nothing that could ever be described as a judge leaning on a case. Every ordinary advantage a person in trouble has, I had to hand back at the door. I said, so I have the truth and no way to move it. She kept her pen. She said data gets challenged all day. Chain, tampering, spoliation. She's done it and won. Then she said the thing I've thought about every week since. A witness under oath is a different animal, Mara. Sooner or later, this case is going to need your face. My face. The one thing I'd spent 16 years keeping out of every frame in that house. We did it on a Thursday afternoon in the lot of a strip center in Dorset because Tasha wanted concrete and cameras and a business address in the record. She hired a forensic tech named Anika Shaw out of the Capitol. Anika brought her own kit and her own paper and a phone on a tripod that ran the whole time. Tasha narrated it like a grocery list. Date, time, place, people, VIN, odometer. Anika photographed the light, the bumper, the seat rails, the odometer, the paired list, all of it, before she touched anything. Then she pulled the module and the card. When she was done, she held them out on a flat palm, and I stood in that lot and held the whole night of November 9th in my hand for about 10 seconds. Smaller than a house key. Weighs nothing. Anika asked if I wanted to review before she sealed it, and I said no. Tasha's eyebrows went up a 1/4 inch, which for her is a shout. I said if I watch it first, then every answer I give from here on is an answer I've had time to shape, and someday somebody is going to ask me under oath whether I saw it before I told my story, and I'm going to want to say no. So Anika put it in a paper bag and sealed the flap with red tape and signed across and dated it, and Tasha signed under her, and it went into a locked case in the trunk of a rental. I didn't know what was on it. I only knew what my truck had been awake for, and Farm Road 12 wasn't the only thing it remembered that night. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't really about a truck. It's about who your family has decided you are, and what happens the first time you refuse to agree. If you've ever been written off by the people who were supposed to know you best, tell me in the comments. I read them.
Now let me tell you what my mother did next, because she waited for the exact right moment, and she is very, very good at this. Sunday, there was a dinner. Not a meeting, a dinner with the good plates and pot roast with the little onions, which I have loved since I was 6 and had not been served in that house in over a decade. My mother had gotten out the album, the fat brown one, and it sat at the end of the table like a third course. Theo was there and allowed to stay up. My father asked about the district I lived in and listened to the whole answer. Paige passed the rolls and said she liked my cut. It was the warmest room I had been in with these people since my 20s, and every degree of it was on purpose, and knowing that did almost nothing to protect me. After Theo went up, my mother put her hand flat on the table and made the offer. Cal had spoken to Boyd. A plea to a reduced count, no jail, community hours, a deferred that seals in 18 months. Then she said the part she'd been saving, softly, looking right at me. And you'd be part of this family again, Mara. Really part. Sunday dinners, Theo's birthdays, all of it. 16 years I'd been standing outside that window, and my mother finally opened the door. And the price on the door was a felony and a woman in a walker. The terrifying thing wasn't the offer. I've been offered things by better operators in worse rooms. The terrifying thing was sitting there with the pot roast and the onions, feeling how much of me still wanted it, and understanding for the first time that they had always known exactly how much. Helen Voss woke on the 19th. I heard it from an aide who recognized me from the waiting room and assumed I was a cousin. She'd come out of the second surgery. They'd set the pelvis. On the 23rd, they got her vertical the first time. I was down the hall when they did it. 2 therapists, a walker, a 58-year-old woman with a pelvis full of hardware trying to move 8 feet. It took her 5 minutes. When she got to the chair, she made a joke I couldn't hear, and both therapists laughed, and Ray stood in the doorway with his hand over his mouth. My father had told me I had nothing riding. I sat in that hallway and counted what Helen Voss had already lost. 28 years on her feet at a register. Gone. Doctors saying she'd walk with a cane and she'd never do a full shift again. $1,600 for a clutch she was saving toward while riding a scooter at night in November. 22 minutes in the weeds.
And in the waiting room on my way out, the TV in the corner was showing my sister at a podium in front of the parish building in the green blazer, saying her family was cooperating fully and her heart was with the Voss family at this difficult time. She'd found exactly the right catch in her voice. I have watched a lot of people testify. I could not have told you it was fake. The presser wasn't a defense, it was a frame. 2 days later, the Kellam Ledger ran a piece about the investigation, and buried in the 12th paragraph was a sentence attributed to a source close to the family. The source said the vehicle belonged to a sister who was estranged, who lives out of state, and who was having a hard time. That's all. 3 facts, all technically true, arranged into a person. Estranged, out of state, having a hard time. I read it in a motel lot and felt something I hadn't felt since I was 26. The particular spin of watching a version of yourself get built by people who share your last name and knowing that version will always travel faster than you will. That evening, Theo texted me for weeks in that home. He's 12. He wrote, "Aunt Mara, did you really do it? Nobody will tell me." I sat on the end of a motel bed and typed and deleted about 6 answers. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to tell him his mother had been drinking since afternoon and left a woman in a ditch and let her aunt's name go into a statement. And every word of that would have been true. And I would have been doing to him exactly what his grandfather did to me at a fish fry in 1999. So I wrote, "I did not. I promise I'll tell you the whole thing when it's over." And I put the phone face down because when I told that kid the truth, I wanted it to be provable. And those are 2 different things. I drove the 5.5 hours home on a Thursday for 1 day, and it was the loneliest 24 hours of the whole thing. I went to see the circuit's ethics officer, a small, precise man named Owen Briggs, who has an office with no windows, and I self-reported before anyone could discover anything, which is the only move that has ever worked in this kind of trouble. I told him a member of my immediate family had implicated me in a state criminal matter, that I was likely to be a witness, and that I intended to cooperate fully. He wrote it down. Then he gave me the rules, and they were the rules I already knew and had hoped he'd soften. I do not identify myself by office in connection with any of it. I do not contact anyone at the parish attorney's office or the state court in any capacity other than as a private citizen represented by counsel. I make no public statement of any kind. If a reporter calls, I say nothing.
He said, "You understand that in practice, this means you will have fewer options than an ordinary person, not more." I said I did. Before I left the courthouse, I stopped in chambers, which were dark, and stood there a minute. The robe was on the back of the door, where it always is. I have worn it for 3 years, and it has never once made me feel like the person my family thinks I am. It has only ever felt like a thing I borrowed from a serious institution and had better take care of. I locked the door and drove back to Kellam with 1 suitcase and no title at all. Whatever came next, I'd be facing it as nobody in particular, which, lucky for me, was the role this family had been training me for my entire life. Friday came and I didn't sign. There was no scene. I sat in my mother's living room and said I would not be signing anything, and my father folded the paper and said, "All right," and that was the whole conversation. Then the house started to close 1 room at a time in the polite way. Saturday, my mother mentioned her sister was coming through and would need the spare room, so I moved to the Kellam Inn by the highway. 40 rooms, a waffle iron, a view of a grain elevator. Monday, a letter came from Cal's office on his letterhead addressed to Tasha. It said his firm represented the Ellison family. It said any suggestion Paige Ellison operated the vehicle was contradicted by the family's recollection, and it said in a sentence that took me 3 readings to fully appreciate that the family would, if necessary, describe how the vehicle had been made available to another driver that evening by its owner, with knowledge of the circumstances. There it is. If I wouldn't be the driver, they'd make me the person who handed the keys to a drunk. Same felony neighborhood, softer paper, my name in it either way. That afternoon, Detective Cho called my cell and asked whether I could come in Wednesday morning to the state post in Brant. And then she said, in the flat way people say things they've decided to say a certain way, "And please bring your counsel." I hung up and sat on the end of that motel bed and understood I had been formally moved into a category. The state post in Brant is brick with a flag and a machine that only takes exact change. Tasha met me in the lot. Lena Cho is about 46, and she has the specific patience of somebody who has been lied to professionally for 20 years and stopped taking it personally around year 6.
She started by telling us two things I did not expect and which changed the shape of the month. The first was that 12 days earlier, the state police had gone to the manufacturer directly with a warrant for the telematics on my truck, its own copy of the paired log and crash record from the company's servers. Nothing to do with me or my hands or my sealed bag. The world had a second door, and it had been opening the whole time without asking my permission. The second was that Paige's statement had a hole in it. She'd told them the house was quiet after 11:10, but a neighbor's doorbell camera across the parish road had caught headlights coming down the Ellison Drive at 11:21 and coming back at 11:53, and my sister had put herself upstairs for all 32 of those minutes. Then Cho asked me to walk through my night. I did. The dish, the stairs, the book, the garage at 10 to 12, the voices, the water, the empty dish. No adjectives, no conclusions. When you've listened to 10,000 witnesses, you learn the honest ones are boring and the liars are vivid. At the end, she flipped back a page, stopped, read something twice. Then she looked up. One more question. Occupation. I hadn't planned it. There was no moment where I decided the day. She asked a routine question off an intake sheet, and I answered it, because you answer questions from investigators truthfully or you don't answer them at all, and there is nothing in between that ends well. I said, United States Magistrate Judge. The room went quiet. Tasha looked at the table. Cho did not say anything for about 4 seconds, which is a long time in a small room. Then she wrote it down. Then she asked which district, and I told her, and she wrote that down too. She had one follow-up, and it was a good one. She asked why it wasn't in the file. I said because nobody had asked. She closed the folder and walked us out, and at the door she put out her hand and said, "Thank you for coming in, Your Honor." And my mother was in the lobby. She'd driven over on her own without telling anyone to sit in a plastic chair by the machine and be helpful and available and find out what was being said about her family. She was 6 feet away. She heard all of it. I watched my mother's face do something I have seen 1,000 times from the bench and never once from her. It wasn't pride. Pride looks different. It was recalculation, the exact expression of a person moving an item out of the liabilities column and trying to work out quickly what it might be worth. She said my name once. I kept walking. In the lot, Tasha asked if I was all right, and I stood there with my keys in my hand and said, "Who'd take your word anyway?" Well, we're about to find out.
It got back to the house inside an hour. My father called that evening and asked me to come by, and I said we could talk on the porch, and we did, with the door shut behind us and the yard light on. I had spent the drive over bracing for the wrong thing. I thought he'd be angry about the concealment, or humiliated, or that somewhere in there would be one sentence about how he wished he'd known. My father was delighted. He sat in the wicker and said it was remarkable, and he said it twice, and then he started working. Did I understand what this changed? A federal judge. His hands were moving now. A federal judge who takes responsibility for a tragic accident, who steps forward, who doesn't hide behind her position. He said it could be reframed inside a week. He said Boyd could be brought along. He said the story stops being a family covering for a candidate and becomes a family of public servants, and Paige's numbers go up, not down, because voters forgive a family that owns its mistakes. He'd found a way to spend my commission. 16 years of not knowing what I did, and inside of 1 hour he had run the appraisal, and the answer was that I was worth more as a confession with a title attached than I'd ever been worth as a daughter. I sat on the porch rail and let him finish. That was the moment I stopped hoping. Not the kitchen, not the letter, not the leak. It turns out hope is the last thing they take, and they don't even take it on purpose. They just say what they actually think out loud, and then it's gone. 2 things happened that week. On Tuesday, Boyd Henson gave a statement to the Ledger saying his office had reviewed the matter, that the evidence to date did not establish who was operating the vehicle, and that he would not be charging anyone at this time. He said tragedy and grieving community, and Helen Voss was not dead, and nobody at that paper asked him about it. On Thursday, Cal filed his supplemental letter. 4 members of the Ellison family were prepared to state that I had made my vehicle available to my sister that evening with knowledge that she had been drinking. 4. My father, my mother, my sister, and because they'd needed a 4th and she was there, my Aunt June, who had gone to bed at 9. Tasha laid it out for me at a booth at the diner by the inn. The state police had a good file, but the state case gets prosecuted by the parish attorney, and the parish attorney had just publicly announced he wasn't prosecuting, and the only thing that overrides a man like Boyd Henson is a record so clean and so public that not charging becomes more expensive than charging. Sworn testimony on the record from the one person in that house whose account contradicted the other four and who had nothing to gain by giving it. She said it has to be you, and it has to be in the open or it doesn't happen at all. Which is when I finally understood the shape of the last 5 weeks. There was one door left in this entire thing, and it only opened from the inside. Let me stop here a second because I want you to sit with the question I had to sit with that night. If telling the truth cost you your entire family, not an argument, not a bad Christmas, all of it permanently, would you still tell it? Don't answer too fast. Put it in the comments. I'll tell you in a minute what I chose and what it cost me. And if you're new here, subscribe because you're going to want to see how this ends. She came to the inn on a Sunday night alone in an old sweatshirt with the hood down, and she'd driven her own car and parked it around the side by the ice machine. No phone in her hand. I have never in my adult life seen my sister with nothing in her hand. I let her in and she sat on the edge of the desk chair, and for about 10 minutes she was a person I'd never met. She talked about being 16, about the summer her friends went to a lake house and she went to a media training in the Capitol because Dad had gotten her a slot through a friend, about how she learned to hold a smile for a photographer's 3rd try. She said when she was in 9th grade she got a C in chemistry, and our father didn't speak to her for 4 days, and she said it the way you'd mention weather. Then she looked up and said, "Do you know what it's like to be this family's only investment?" And I did know, actually, from the other side of it. She didn't apologize. That's the part I need you to hear. In that whole conversation, she never once said Helen Voss's name, never asked how she was, never said she was sorry for anything except her own position. What she'd come to do was trade. "Take the plea," she said. "You're strong enough to survive being the failure. You've been doing it for years. I'm not." For about a minute, I could see the sister I might have had if this family had been in any other business. Then she stood to leave, and on her way past the window, she checked her reflection and touched her hair, and the campaign came back into her face like a light switching on. They set the meeting for Wednesday at 11 in the conference room above the hardware store, and everybody came. My father in a jacket, my mother with her bag in her lap, Paige in the green blazer straight from a radio hit, Aunt June and Cal at the head with a folder, and inside the folder the 3rd version of my confession, and beside it, set out square on the wood, a black fountain pen with the cap already off. I have thought a lot about that pen. He'd uncapped it before I walked in. That's a man who has never once been told no in this room.
Tasha sat down and opened her briefcase, and I picked the pin up. I did. I want to be honest about it. I held it, and then I set it down and pushed it a few inches away, and I said no in a voice I didn't have to raise. Then Tasha started reading. At 8:40 that morning, we had filed with the Office of the Attorney General a sworn affidavit from me describing everything I have told you. The dish, the keys, the seat, the paired device, the garage at 10 to midnight, the meeting at the island, the typed statement. Attached to it, a formal request for appointment of a special prosecutor on the grounds that the parish attorney has a documented 31-year political relationship with a person of interest. Attached to that, a chain of custody affidavit from Anika Shao and a transfer receipt for one sealed evidence bag delivered that morning to the state post at Brant. My father said my name. My mother said it 3 times in 3 different registers, all the way to the door. The sharp one, then the soft one, then the one from when I was small. I didn't turn around. 16 years I'd been the quiet daughter of the Ellison family, and she died in that doorway on a Wednesday morning, and I left her sitting at the table with the pen. That night, something slid under the door of room 11. An envelope, no stamp, my mother's handwriting. There was no letter in it. There was a photograph, and it was me at 8 on the front steps in a blue coat holding a dog we had for 3 years. And on the DAC in ballpoint it said, "Kitchen tomorrow 9. Come alone, please." She'd underlined please. So I sat at that kitchen island for the 2nd time in the same seat with the same coffee, and my mother told me what she had never told anyone. On the night of November 9th, she did not go to bed. She stayed up because there were still 4 people in her yard and a caterer's van in the drive, and she was in the front room at 10 to 12 when the garage went up.
She met Paige in the kitchen. My sister's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get the tea out of the box. And my mother went out through the mudroom and stood in the garage and looked at the left front of my truck at the split in the pale scrape, and she came back in. And she took every set of keys out of the ceramic dish in the front hall and put them in her robe pocket. Not so no one could drive, so that at 6:30 the next morning when the news came on, nobody would be able to say what had been where. She'd known since 11:59 that night. She'd known when she wiped the doorframe. She'd known when she poured Cal his coffee. She'd known when she came around that island and put both hands on my shoulders and looked in my face and told me to say I was driving. I asked her why she was telling me now. She reached across and took my hand, and she was crying, and she was completely composed, and I realized she hadn't come to confess. Confession requires regret. She had come to negotiate. The hearing was the next morning at 9:30. She had 18 hours and she used every one of them well, because my mother is the best strategist in that family and always has been, and the proof is that nobody outside it has ever heard her name. She didn't threaten me. She didn't mention the 4 affidavits or the letter or the ledger. She held my hand on the granite and she made me an offer, and it was the only offer in 16 years that ever had a chance of working. Come home, she said, not for a dinner. Come home. Be our daughter again. Christmases, Theo's graduation. Your father will put your picture back up. I'll do it myself. Everything you've wanted since you were 26, and you know it and I know it. And then softly, almost tenderly, all you have to do is not remember quite so clearly tomorrow. She wasn't asking me to lie. She was too smart for that, and lying under oath is a thing you can be prosecuted for. She was asking me to be uncertain, to say I couldn't be sure about the time, that I'd been asleep, that it had been a long day. Nobody would ever be able to touch me for it. Helen Voss would go home with a cane and a settlement from an insurance company. My sister would be on the council by spring, and I would get my family back. And she finished it the way she finishes everything, with the sentence she taught me in a parking lot when I was 26, only turned around into a gift. Pick the version where you still have a family, sweetheart. I looked at the wall past her shoulder at the photographs that stop in the year I turned 26, and I gave her my answer in one sentence, and then I drove back to the inn and slept for 6 hours, which surprised me. What I said to my mother in that kitchen was this: Mom, I've spent 16 years being the version that was convenient. Tomorrow, I'm going to be accurate. Then I said I loved her because it was true and because I wanted it on the record between us. And then I left.
The Kellam Parish Courthouse was limestone from 1908 with 8 steps and a bad rail, and at 20 to 9 the next morning there were 2 cameras from the Capitol and 3 reporters at the bottom of them. They knew by then. Somebody at the Ledger had run the appointment down. The headline that morning had the word judge in it in capital letters, next to my last name, forever. A woman put a microphone near my face and asked if I had any comment on my sister. I said no comment. She asked if I was here in my official capacity. I said I was here as a witness. She asked one more something about the family, and I said no comment, and I went up the 8 steps and through the doors, and I did not stop, and there is no clip of me anywhere saying anything about any of it. And that was the entire strategy, and it cost me more than anything else in this story. My father had told me I had nothing writing. He was right in a way he'd never bothered to look at closely. I had nothing they had ever counted. My name, my oath, and my spine, and I was about to spend all 3 of them in one morning. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old radiators, and in the first row on the aisle, in a wheelchair with a cane across her lap and her husband beside her, was Helen Voss. The special prosecutor was a woman named Grace Pell, appointed 9 days earlier out of the Attorney General's office, and she had the gift of asking short questions. I was sworn at 10:10. I sat in a wooden chair in a room with a ceiling fan that clicked once every rotation, and I told it in order. The dish in the front hall and what my mother started when I was 8, the keys going in the afternoon, the drinks at the party, the yard signs and the shed, the stairs, the first door on the right, the scrape of the dish, the screen, the garage at 11:53, the voices, the empty dish at 1 a.m., the news at 6:30, the tea towel, the split in the headlight and the seat 3 inches forward and the paired device that said 11:22 at night, the lawyer already sitting at the island, the typed statement with my name on it and the word panicked in it, which somebody later changed to became confused, I did not editorialize once.
Anika Shaw had testified before me and put the sealed bag in the record, red tape and signature and date, opened in front of the clerk, matched line for line against the manufacturer's own telematics that the state police had pulled independently weeks before I ever handed anything to anybody. Then Paige's attorney stood up for Cross, and he was good, and he went exactly where I would have gone. He asked how a family could possibly fail to know that their own daughter sat on a federal bench. He said it twice with the right amount of disbelief, and he turned toward the gallery when he said it, because he wanted the room to hear how absurd it was, and he was right that it was absurd. I let the fan click twice. Then I said, because I helped them not know for 16 years. I made it easy. That's my share of this, counselor, and I finished paying it. He asked me to clarify, and behind him, at the defense table, my sister started talking to her lawyer's back. Here is a thing I have learned from years around criminal courtrooms. People who are coached for cameras are the worst witnesses alive, because a camera never interrupts you, and a courtroom does nothing else. Her attorney told her to sit down. She didn't. She stood up at the defense table in the green blazer with her hands out, palms up, the gesture she uses at the end of a stump speech, and she started to reframe. She said this had been turned into something it wasn't. She said her sister had been out of the family for years, and there was context the court wasn't hearing. She said the word narrative out loud in a courtroom, which is a thing you can only do if you have never in your life been in one. The judge told her twice that she would have her opportunity, and on the third try, she got to the end of the sentence she'd been circling for 6 weeks, and it came out of her at full volume in a room with a court reporter in it. It was one mistake. One. People like her get to fail their entire lives, and it costs them nothing. I don't get even one. Nobody moved. Helen Voss looked at the floor. In the third row, my mother put her hand over her mouth, and I don't know to this day whether it was for her daughter at the table or her daughter in the chair. Then the judge gave it, and it was over. In the flat, administrative way these things are actually over. Probable cause found, bound over for trial, conditions of release modified, surrender of passport, a subpoena issued that afternoon to Marjorie Ellison regarding the location and handling of a set of vehicle keys on the night of November 9th. And I sat in that wooden chair while the room emptied and thought about my sister asking me who'd take my word anyway, under oath with the truth and a technician's signature across a seal. Everyone, Paige. That's the entire point of the building. She took a plea in March to felony leaving the scene of an accident involving serious injury, 90 days in the parish jail, 3 years probation, restitution, license suspended for a year. She withdrew from the race in a statement that ran 80 seconds and thanked her supporters.
Cal Reardon is under investigation by the state bar for his conduct in the preparation of a statement for an unrepresented party, and he has not written to me, and I don't expect him to. Boyd Henson announced in May that he would not seek another term and joined a firm in the capital that does municipal bond work. My parents were not charged. Pal looked at it hard and told Tasha the truth. Proving what my mother did with a set of keys in her own house past a jury was not a case she could win. I want to be honest about how that sat. It sat badly for about a month, then it stopped. A courtroom is a narrow instrument, and it was never going to give me what I actually needed. And by spring, I understood that what I actually needed had already happened in a doorway above a hardware store. The party organization slotted a school board member into my sister's spot by April, and he is polling fine. My father still has his table at the Legion breakfast. Nothing was cleansed. That's not what happens. Helen Voss went back to the Pinecone in January, 4 hours a day, 3 days a week on a stool they bolted down for her next to the register. The civil side settled with the insurer in the spring. It isn't enough, and it's more than she'd have gotten, and she bought the clutch, and then she bought Ray a greenhouse. I stop in whenever I'm in the parish on paperwork, which I still am, and she lets me buy a coffee, and then she charges me for the pie. Owen Briggs closed my ethics file in April with a 2-line memo. Judge was a fact witness in a family matter. No use of office, no violation.
And on the shelf in my chambers, behind the desk, where most judges put a photograph of their family, there is now a picture of a woman in an apron standing outside a cafe with one hand on a cane and the other on my shoulder. In June, Theo texted me. He wrote, "Mom says I'm not supposed to text you, but nobody will tell me what actually happened." I typed for a long time. Then I told him the truth. All of it in the plainest language a 12-year-old could carry. And I did not make either of his parents a monster, and I did not make them innocent. He wrote back, "Thank you for saying it straight. Nobody ever says it straight." There's one more thing, and it's small, and it's the reason I'm telling you any of this. In July, a new clerk started in my chambers, 25, nervous, very serious about the coffee, and on her second week, in the middle of nothing, she asked me whether I had family nearby. A year ago, I would have said no and let it go by the way I let everything else go by for 16 years, and she would have written me down as private and been right. Instead, I heard myself say it out loud, the entire true sentence. No, my family's 5.5 hours away, and we're not in contact, and it's because my sister injured a woman with my truck, and my parents asked me to take the charge, and I testified. She didn't know where to put her face. I told her it was all right, that people mostly don't know what to say, and they don't have to. Then we went back to the motion calendar. My mother was right about one thing, and I've decided to let her keep it. Families do run on stories. That part is true, but I'm done telling versions. If your family only loves the version of you that stays convenient, that was never love, and the day you stop auditioning for it is the day the rest of your life is finally allowed to start. That's my story. One empty key dish, one sealed evidence bag, and one signature I never gave. If there's someone in your life who has you filed away as the family failure, hear me. You do not owe anybody a smaller version of yourself. Not at Thanksgiving, not ever. If this one stayed with you, send it to somebody who needs it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.